the small town of St. Hollow, there was a legend that had circulated for generations. It was said that on Halloween night, a strange fog would cover the streets, and anyone unlucky enough to be alone during that night would encounter the Fog Man. They said he wasn't made of flesh and bone, but of smoke and darkness, a faceless figure that fed on fear and the souls of those foolish enough to challenge him. My friends Daniel, Lucas, and I had always been skeptical of such stories. It was just another tale to scare kids, nothing we needed to take seriously. So, that Halloween, we decided it would be funny to challenge the legend. Our plan was simple. Cross the Old Town Park, known for being the fog's epicenter, and film the experience to prove that the Fog Man was nothing more than superstition. The air was heavy and damp when we left the house. The fog was already beginning to form, covering the ground in a thick layer that slowly rose through the trees and streetlights. As we walked toward the park, the cold grew more intense, as if we were leaving the known world behind and entering forbidden territory. Even with the flashlight on, it was hard to see more than a few steps ahead. "It'll be quick," Daniel murmured, trying to hide the tension in his voice. We go in, film for 5 minutes, and come out laughing at all of this. As soon as we crossed the park's rusted gate, silence enveloped us. There was no sound of the wind, no rustling of leaves. It was as if the whole world had stopped to watch what was about to happen. The fog around us seemed alive, swirling slowly, as if it wanted to surround and isolate us. As we moved forward, I heard something that made my heart race. Footsteps. Not ours, but slow, heavy steps, as if someone were following us closely. I looked back, but there was nothing but the fog. Daniel and Lucas heard it too and stopped, exchanging worried glances. "It's probably some animal," Lucas said, trying to sound calm, but his eyes were wide with fear. We kept walking, but the footsteps followed us, always at the same distance, as if an invisible presence was watching us. With each passing second, the fog grew denser, and I started feeling like something was moving within it. It wasn't possible to see clearly, but there were shadows in the mist, shadows that looked human but dissolved the moment we tried to focus on them. At some point, we realized we were lost. The path that was supposed to lead us back to the gate had simply vanished, as if the park was rearranging itself around us. And that's when we saw him for the first time. A tall, slender figure, made entirely of fog, standing just a few meters away from us. He had no face, but I could feel his gaze on me, piercing my soul. The Fog Man had found us. "Run!" I shouted, and we bolted in the direction we thought was the exit. But the more we ran, the more the fog seemed to envelop us, draining our energy and making our bodies feel heavy. The figure's steps followed us, closer and closer. It was as if he was toying with us, waiting for the right moment to strike. Lucas was the first to fall. The fog around him became so dense that he disappeared from our sight within seconds. All we heard was his desperate scream, echoing in the void, before he was completely swallowed. Daniel and I kept running, but we knew there was nowhere to go. The Fog Man wasn't just following us. He was surrounding us, like a predator savoring the fear of its prey. Finally, we found a clearing in the middle of the park. For a moment, we thought we were safe, but then we realized we weren't alone. In the center of the clearing, other figures were emerging from the fog, all with featureless faces, like distorted reflections of people who had been lost there before us. And among them was Lucas. His body was there, but his eyes were empty, and his mouth curled into a sickly smile, as if he were no longer himself. Daniel tried to pull him, but it was useless. Lucas simply dissolved into smoke, spreading into the fog that surrounded us. That's when we understood the truth. There was no escape. The Fog Man didn't just hunt us. He turned those he found into part of himself. And now it was our turn. The last thing I remember is Daniel screaming as the fog closed in around us, tightening like an invisible hand. I felt my body lose strength and my vision blurred. The cold was unbearable, but there was something worse. The certainty that I would never leave. The fog man had claimed us. Now, I'm just another shadow in the fog, patiently waiting for the next soul brave enough to challenge the legend. If you're ever alone on Halloween night and hear footsteps in the fog, run. But know that, no matter how fast you run, he will always find you. Before we get to the next story, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a mystery. Hit like and let me know in the comments what's given you chills so far. When my boyfriend, Gabriel, and I moved into that old house in the countryside, we knew it needed renovations, but the vintage charm was irresistible. The wide windows, the creaky wooden staircase, and the enormous fireplace gave the place a sense of living history. We were excited to start a new chapter, but we soon realized the house was more than just a charming relic of the past. It held secrets. On the first night, as we placed the last boxes in the bedroom, we heard something curious. A faint repetition of our words, as if someone were imitating our voices from the other side of the walls. First, we found it funny. Gabriel joked that the house was alive, and we laughed together, but there was something unsettling about those echoes. They weren't just mere repetitions. They sounded slightly delayed, as if a second or two separated our words from those empty replies. The next night, things got stranger. We were in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard Gabriel calling me from upstairs. "Anna, can you help me up here?" He had never gone upstairs. I looked at him, standing next to me, and a chill ran down my spine. "Did you hear that?" I asked. He nodded, pale. "Yes, that was my voice." We tried to ignore it, but the feeling of unease grew. The echoes no longer just imitated what we said. They started saying things we hadn't spoken. We were in the bedroom folding clothes when a voice echoed from the living room, but with a sinister alteration. "There's no way out." Gabriel tried to mask his fear, suggesting that maybe it was the old plumbing or some acoustic issue with the house. But deep down, we knew it wasn't that. This was something else. Something that was watching us and knew far more than just how to repeat our words. On Halloween night, the mystery reached its peak. While we were watching a movie in the living room, the fireplace, which hadn't worked until then, suddenly lit up with a strong flame. We jumped to our feet, startled, and at that moment the house began to speak. The walls vibrated with overlapping voices, as if a chorus of people were whispering all at once. Some voices were familiar, ours. Others were unknown, hoarse, and filled with pain. We tried to leave, but the doors were locked. The windows seemed welded to the walls, and the air grew heavy, as if we were submerged in water. Then, the echoes began to reveal secrets. They spoke of previous residents who had disappeared, mentioning names and events we had never heard of before. It was as if the house were alive, storing memories that were now being unleashed on us uncontrollably. The feeling of claustrophobia intensified. Every time we tried to move, the echoes called our names, beckoning us with an urgency that bordered on desperation. Then we heard a clearer, more distinct voice. It was my own voice, but it came from upstairs. "Anna, come up here. Everything's okay now." Against my instincts, I started climbing the stairs. Gabriel tried to hold me back, but something in those words hypnotized me. It was as if I had to see what was upstairs. When I reached the bedroom, I found a door we had never noticed before. A small door hidden behind a wardrobe. The sound of the echoes was coming from there, growing louder and louder. With trembling hands, I opened the door. On the other side was a small, dark room, empty except for a broken mirror and an old chair in the center. As I stepped inside, it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the space. I looked into the mirror and saw something that made me scream. The reflection wasn't mine. It was a version of myself, but with empty eyes and a smile that didn't belong to me. Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the room. I heard Gabriel on the other side, desperately pounding on the door. But when I tried to respond, I realized my voice had now become part of the echoes. I was trapped in there, just another voice among the many that haunted the house. Now, every night, Gabriel still hears me calling for him, but he knows that if he follows my voice, he'll become part of the echoes too. The doll arrived in an unexpected package, sent by a distant aunt I barely knew. It was an old doll, the kind no one made anymore, with a delicate porcelain head, wavy black hair, and blue eyes that seemed to sparkle in the sunlight. My daughter, Lara, loved her immediately. "I'm going to call her Mimi," she announced, carefully holding the doll as if it were a treasure. From the first day, something about the doll bothered me. I couldn't quite explain why, but there was something unsettling about the expression on its face. It was as if it were smiling, but only halfway, a smile that seemed to carry a hidden intention. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my mind exaggerating. But the feeling of unease grew every time I looked at it. On the first night, everything seemed normal. I put Lara to bed and left Mimi sitting in the armchair next to her bed, as she requested. But in the middle of the night, I was awakened by a strange sound. It sounded like light footsteps, as if someone was walking barefoot through the house. I got up, certain Lara had gotten out of bed, but when I entered her room, I found her fast asleep. The doll, however, was no longer in the armchair. It was now lying at the foot of the bed on its side, with its eyes wide open, as if it had been watching my daughter. A chill ran down my spine. I picked up the doll and placed it back in the armchair, trying to convince myself that Lara must have moved it before falling asleep. But deep down, something was wrong. I closed the door to her room and went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep again. The air in the house felt heavier, and there was a strange sense that I was being watched. The next night, things got worse. It was almost midnight when I heard the same sound of footsteps through the house. I went to Lara's room only to find her sleeping again. But this time, the doll wasn't in the room. I searched the house until I finally found it sitting at the kitchen table, with its hands resting on its lap and its head tilted slightly to the side. It was as if it had moved on its own and was waiting for something, or someone. The feeling of fear became unbearable. I took the doll and put it back in Lara's room, this time closing the door firmly. But as soon as I turned around, I heard the distinct sound of the bedroom door slowly creaking open behind me. When I looked back, there was Mimi, lying in the hallway, with her head twisted at an unnatural angle. That night was the first time I thought about getting rid of the doll. I took it to the garage and locked it in a wooden box, determined to throw it away the next morning. But before I could do so, something even stranger happened. At exactly midnight, the house lights started flickering, and I heard a soft laugh coming from upstairs. I ran to Lara's room, fearing the worst, and found her sitting up in bed, talking to someone in the dark. "Who are you talking to?" I asked, trying to control my panic. "Mimi," she replied, pointing to the corner of the room. And then I saw it. The doll was back, sitting in the armchair with an even wider smile than before. It was impossible. I had locked it in the garage. From that night on, things spiraled out of control. The doll seemed to move on its own, appearing in different places around the house, always with that disturbing smile. Lara said Mimi talked to her, told her secrets, and promised never to leave her. I felt like I was going mad. I knew I had to get rid of it, but every time I tried, something stopped me, as if an invisible force were holding me back. On the last night of Halloween, the situation reached its climax. At midnight, the house lights went out completely, and I heard footsteps running through the house. When I got to Lara's room, she was standing next to the doll, holding its small porcelain hands. She said, "It's time to go," my daughter whispered, her eyes gleaming in the darkness. Before I could react, I felt something cold touch my arm. The doll was staring at me, its eyes now completely black. And then, everything went dark. When I woke up, the house was silent. Lara and Mimi were gone. I searched everywhere, but there was no sign of them. Only the empty armchair, as if waiting for the next occupant. Now, every night at midnight, I hear footsteps in the house, and I know that somewhere, Mimi is still waiting.